Hey guys, I'm the 50s Kid. Welcome back to hopefully the final conclusion to my big oil leak saga. I'm sure you guys all have oil leak sagas of your own, so I appreciate you tuning into my little one. A lot of you had several interesting suggestions, very helpful suggestions on the last video. A lot of you, there were a lot of guesses of similar things. Only a couple of people had some other ones. A lot of people suggested to use UV dye to kind of see where the oil was leaking from. That's definitely a helpful thing, especially if you've got a lot of long-standing oil leaks and you've got a lot of sort of crud built up and you can't really tell what's fresh. Could help if you put some dye in the oil and then use UV light to kind of see. I've done that before in my experience. It's not that helpful. Sometimes the UV is just a little bit too diluted and it's kind of hard to see where it's really leaking from. I've done that on some engines before. Maybe the bottle that's available at my AutoZone is really not the best one to use. I don't know. But I mean, every time I take this thing apart, I can see where, generally the oil is leaking from, but it's never just like one spot because it's really hard to describe. But yeah, that's a good suggestion. Some of you had the suggestion about you were suspicious that there was oil sort of on my starter, and you kind of suspected the the crank sensor. And I originally started off this video by checking that. I pulled off the intake manifold and saw that, there's a lot of oil all around the crank sensor. And then I unplugged the crank sensor and there's actually fresh oil inside of the connector. And what I found was the crank sensor itself had sort of split open right in the middle. And I surmised that oil was sort of leaking through it and then into the inside of the connector. And so I went ahead and changed it, and then I cleaned up like the area. It wasn't really that much fresh oil. There was just like signs that oil had been leaking for a while in that area, I guess since my rebuild. So I cleaned all of that up thinking that, oh, that must have been, hopefully that was it, right? Maybe the oil was just sort of leaking backwards down the back of the engine. And I did that, and that was not it. That was unfortunately not the solution. So, and unfortunately, I lost that footage as well. I guess I just accidentally deleted it. So my bad on that one, but I will kind of show you that's definitely not the problem. Yeah, I'm back to, well, number one, I've already taken the transmission out again, just because the transmission is also leaking. I definitely, for sure, it's leaking. When I took off the belly pan this time, there was cherry red transmission fluid sort of on the end of it, and then golden oil, on the other side. So definitely both of them were leaking. Oil of both kinds were leaking. So that transmission had to come out again. And this time I'm going to change everything else on the transmission that there is to change. There are little washers where the oil pump bolts into the transmission, and those washers have rubber impregnation in them, sort of like the oil pan gasket on the engine. And so I'm going to change all 9 of those. And then I'm also going to pull out the oil pump and change the O-ring around the perimeter of it, put that back in. So I've already pulled the valve body, and I've pulled out the little tubes that go into the oil pump and all that stuff. So the oil pump is kind of ready to come out. And that's what we're probably going to start this video with. Maybe I'll show you kind of what the oil looks like on the back of the engine, but I'm going to start this with just kind of refurbing the transmission a little bit and changing everything there is to change there. And then we'll pick up with the final things on the engine and what I think I have to do at this point in order to solve the problems for good. Anyway, that's the video, so let's get started. Like I said, I pulled out the valve body, and these are these little plastic tubes, O-ring in either end, and I will be replacing these just cause. And let's see, this one actually cracked right here anyway, so it needs to be replaced. So these actually stick up into the oil pump, which goes in the front of the transmission right here. And if you don't take these tubes out along with this spring and this valve, this is like the selector valve. I don't know if it's a selector valve, it's a valve. If you don't take that out, then you can't pull the oil pump assembly out. Incidentally, this is what you would do if your oil pump bearing spins and you have to like completely replace the oil pump. If you want to do it without like a complete transmission rebuild, you have to pull this stuff out, put the pan back on so that you can support it on the transmission jack, and then you can pull out the torque converter, pull out the whole oil pump assembly as I'm about to show, and, you know, change the pump, stick it back in, put it all back together. That's how you do it. So I'm going through that motion anyway, just because I need to change the seals and the rings around that area. So I'm getting pretty good at pulling this transmission, man. And including all that work I had to do with pulling the valve body out and all that stuff. I had this all done in about 2.5 hours. So yeah, I can see how you can make some money on flat rate once you were doing this quite a few times and you knew exactly the most efficient way to do it. Anyway, it's all out, it's all good, it's the next day, and now I'm going to pull out this torque converter and then pull out the whole pump and all that stuff, that front assembly. You see I've got the tin foil, aluminum foil under here. That's going to act as my funnel to funnel the fluid down into the pan, which is right here. And, you know, that part's going to be fun. So we're just going to do that. So one tip for you is the starter bolts are the same threads as here, and you can kind of use them as handles to help get the thing out, and when putting it back in, definitely helpful. So we're just going to do this. Oh, look at that. It didn't leak too much. That's basically because I had drained most of the fluid and taken the valve body out. That allows most of the fluid to drain out of the torque converter and everything. So cool. No muss, no fuss there. So guys, here's what it looks like here. And I am pretty sure that I damaged this seal when I was installing the torque converter last time, because I can see, particularly sort of on the right edge, I can see that I folded the seal a little bit and probably definitely damaged it. So my fault, my bad. I'm still also going to change the seals around the bolts, because I don't know if you can see this. Let me stand this light up. Right here, I can see that there's oil, a little drop of oil there, and you know, they're just all kind of a little bit wet. And I cannot be sure also that the O-ring that goes around this perimeter here is good or not. So like I said, I'm changing it. I've already come this far, so I'm definitely going to change it. But man, you got to be real careful when installing this that torque converter. Like, I struggled with it for an hour plus trying to get the thing in. It was a real pain. I probably can't get the angle on this, but there's two teeth on the side. See how there are like teeth on the end of the torque converter? Those slip into like matching bosses on the transmission inside the oil pump. And if those things aren't, I mean, those things need to be aligned, basically. You need to sort of turn them on the inside, maybe slip a screwdriver in there and sort of turn them so that they're on the top and bottom. And it makes it a lot easier to get the whole thing in. And also that gear can tend, the gear on the inside there can tend to sort of slip down. So you sort of need to angle the torque converter up a little bit to kind of get it in and get that gear moved up into the center. So it's a big pain in the butt. So yeah, that's probably why it was leaking so much. So I will replace the seal again before I'm done with this whole thing. So you see how there's like a little black rubber in the center of this thing? That's what helps it do the sealing. Yeah, so maybe, I don't know, maybe I didn't use the original parts back when I did this rebuild a long time ago. I honestly don't remember. Don't remember where I got the kit. Let's see, this is what I did in my original video. See, now I'm gonna have to kick this thing, put my foot up against it in order to get it to not move. I don't know if that's going to be possible. Maybe I can use my knee. Yeah, that came right off. Okay. You know what would be really useful in this situation is one of those slide hammer locking pliers. It's literally just a Frankenstein thing where the slide hammer threads onto this bolt on the locking plier. You lock it on there and go kunk, 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 and it pulls it out. I don't have one of those, but it would be really helpful. I had this up here and I was pulling and I could see it sort of flexing and coming out. So it's not really stuck there. It's sort of stuck down here at the bottom. So I've been trying to work it. I remember, I mean, I watched my own video and I had this thing on the floor on the ground. I had my feet braced up against here and then I was just pulling. That gives you all the leverage that you could possibly get out of yourself. But I can't do that in this situation. The thing is trapped underneath the car here. So unless I want to slide it down off this thing, which I don't want to do, it's not coming down. Actually, this thing's kind of tilted, so let's fix that. I can't get the leverage that I need. All right, why don't we'll come back to this. All right, guys, we're back. It's actually been a week. I decided to order the right tool to do this because I was having so much trouble pulling this before. And the right tool is this that I was talking about, where it's a little slide hammer thingy. And you can just slide hammer this out. So, hook this up. So now I'll be able to just kind of slide hammer this and pull this out. Now, I'm a little apprehensive about doing this. I've been thinking on and off, like, should I do this? Should I not do this? Should I replace this O-ring? Is it leaking from this O-ring? I don't really know. My experience tells me that it might be a little difficult to get this back in. And I just don't want to go through difficult. You know what I mean? I want to go through easy. So ultimately, I think I'm going to do it, but it needed to be said. So there. Okay, I've pulled it just enough, I think, to get at the O-ring along the side, I believe. Oh, I need my fingers. Yeah, I can definitely get at the O-ring here. I think I'm just gonna leave it here. I'm not gonna pull it all the way out because I think it's sort of like indexed, sort of where it needs to be. So I can just use a pick to pick the O-ring off, put the new one on, lube up that O-ring real good, and push this back into place. Probably help draw it back with the bolts too. So I think that's my plan here. That was the original plan and it's working out. All right, let's get this out of here. Yeah, there we go. So let's take a look at this seal. It feels good. I think it was just fine. Still feels rounded, you know? Probably unnecessary, but who cares? Okay, need my actual fingers. Okay, very good. Little assembly goo, some blue assembly goo. I don't know where my green assembly goo went that I bought 5 years ago. Disappeared into the ether of my garage, man. As everything does. Incidentally, I was able to look back at my Amazon order for that green goo and assembly goo, see what I paid for it back then, which was $10, and it's $15 now. So that's inflation for you. Cool. All right. I think that is good. That's ready to go back in. Gloves back on. I can just sort of slide back in. I may need to tap that in with, no, I was able to just push it. Great. Yeah, so it's seated. I believe I can push back on this because it pinches on the thing there, on the body. Yeah, it's real good. Now what I need to do is go find the torque specs for these bolts on the front, get them all ready with new washers. And what do you think? Should I put a dab of sealant behind the washers as well? Again, you know how I always say, the washer is the gasket is the gasket. You don't need two gaskets, but I think this design of this gasket has proven to be not that reliable. It could not hurt to put a little dab of some kind of sealant around each one just to kind of act as an additional barrier. So regarding these new washers here, you can actually feel that the rubber is sort of raised on the new ones. The old ones, it's flattened. So, you know, they get flattened once they're used once, and that's why you definitely shouldn't reuse them. I'm sure people reuse them and use sealant in order to kind of try to get away with it, and maybe that works for them. But anyway, I finally bought Dry Bond 1209, which is the actual silicone you're supposed to use for this whole job, for replacing the gaskets on this car. You know, anytime you need to seal the edges, the corners on the gaskets, this is what you're supposed to use, which I'm sure it's probably the same thing as just gray RTV, but whatever. T27, just gonna run these down. So the torque on these is 11 Newton meters. Finally, you. All right, we are all torqued back down. No muss, no fuss, which is great. Now we can get this seal out of here. I did buy a new one. I think I need a different tool for that. Make sure to just leave that in there. So I'm kind of pissed because I did buy a new seal, but I don't have it. Look at that. That's the damage on the seal. Let me, hang on guys. Can you see right up there? That's the damage that I caused on the seal when I was trying to reinstall the torque converter the first time. This up here, I did that just now, taking the thing out, but this on the inside lip right there, that's the damage that I did. That's why the transmission was leaking this time for sure. Now, like I said, I know I bought another seal, but I don't think they sent it in the box. I'm kind of pissed. I definitely know I bought another one. So I got to look around and figure out, maybe I don't remember, I might have put it somewhere, so let me figure this out. Yeah, so I just confirmed I definitely did buy another seal from FCP Euro, and it was in the order and it didn't ship. All the other items from the order shipped, the O-rings and all that stuff, but that seal did not ship. So man, I'm dead in the water here. It's the weekend, I can't get one. So we'll have to pick up the video again later. All right guys, just because we gotta wait on the transmission is not a big deal. Let's just pivot to the oil pan or the back of the engine and figure out what's going on with the leak. I actually know what's causing the leak, and I'm gonna get to it in a second. Let me recap all the suggestions that everybody had. Number one, one common suggestion was whenever you do a rear main seal housing, you're gonna have to do an oil pan gasket after that. You just should, just because you're never gonna get it to stop leaking unless you do the oil pan gasket. I would say if you've never done the oil pan gasket, yes, of course, the oil pan gasket's still leaking, but this is a brand new oil pan gasket. It's, I don't know, it's about a year old. I don't believe that there's anything wrong with it. However, it looks like there's something wrong with it because mostly it looks like the leak is still happening from around the bottom edge. As you see, there's no oil leaking on the top. It's definitely not leaking out of this oil gallery plug right here, like I originally thought. I'm still gonna fix this time just because I might as well. And mainly the reason is because the reddish color around here, I used this white sealant. I'll show you what it looks like in the tube in a little bit, but I used that white sealant around here, and so it should be white, not orange like the sort of the color of oil. And I just want you to observe there's no oil leaking down here at all. There was no oil on this area. There's no oil on the metal plate that goes on here. It's definitely not leaking from there. I'm still going to do it anyway because I distinctly remember when I put this engine back together, I was screwing these plugs in and I was screwing them in and I thought, oh, that's not seating. That's weird. So, I mean, I didn't want to keep on screwing it in and risk sort of losing it, losing the threads on the inside. So I just I figured the sealant would hold it in, would harden up and hold it in. And it, for the most part, it has. But I've realized, I've actually been to the junkyard and examined another one of these, and I've realized that I just needed to screw it in a little bit more and it would have bottomed out. And I think that that's the reason why some of the oil seeped in there. This sealant, it's an anaerobic sealant. It seals when in the absence of air. And so I think I just didn't seal it in and squeeze the threads tight enough to the point where there's just like a little bit of sealant between the threads and it would have sealed properly and hardened up properly. Like it does here. You'll notice there's just no oil seepage on these bolts at all because I used the proper amount of sealant and these bolts get tightened all the way up. So what I'm saying is I'm going to pull this plug, clean the threads out, put more sealant and thread it all the way in and seat it properly. And that will take care of that for good. But that's definitely not the sign of the oil leak. This time you can tell that it's all coming from just the lower area. Some of you suggested that because there was some droplets of oil on these bolts that I should remove the bolts and put some sealant on them. And the thing is, these bolts are on the outside of where the sealing surface of the oil pan gasket is. So, and they are blind bolts. They go into a blind hole. So there's no way that oil would be leaked unless that gasket itself is bad. There's no reason you should have to put RTV on these bolts. That's not going to stop any kind of leak because the leak is happening from somewhere else, from some other area. And you know that really wouldn't solve anything, is essentially what I'm saying. So I don't believe that that's it. It's a good suggestion though. But another thing people noticed is on this area, on the actual block itself, there's a little bit of a scratch. And the scratch begins before and ends after the sealing surface of the gasket behind here. And so maybe some oil is seeping through that area. I don't remember how deep the gouge is. It could just be sort of a surface scratch. I don't remember. So I'm definitely going to pull this again and change it. I'll put some RTV on that area just to take care of that. But none of that is what's causing the leak. None of that's what it is. You're not going to believe what it actually is. I know that I've found it for sure. And I think it's best to just show you and then I'll explain what happened. There is an ankle biter mosquito in here and he's after blood, but he's not going to get it today because I'm wearing pants this time. So, watch this. See that? That is where it's leaking from. And the reason there's so much oil coming out of there now is because the engine's tilted down this way. So it's all sort of pooled up and the level's just a little bit, you know, a little higher than what it normally would be. The problem is these bolts, these two lower bolts here and here, when you buy a new housing, it comes with new bolts and these bolts have a blue sealant on them. And you guys know in America, the blue sealant that we have is medium strength thread locker, right? So I've always thought that these were blind holes and it was just blue medium strength thread locker that was there to prevent the bolt from vibrating out under engine vibration. But that's not what it is. It's actually sealant for an oil passage. And what the mistake that I've been making is I've only been putting a dab of blue Loctite on the tip of this and threading it in, and that's not enough. It needs a whole smear of some kind of sealant. Perhaps if I did use enough blue Loctite and screwed it in, that the Loctite would have, you know, hardened up correctly and that would have prevented all the leaks from happening. But I haven't been doing that. I haven't been putting enough sealant. That is what's causing the leak. That is absolutely, definitely what's causing the leak. I've done that both times now. I distinctly remember doing it. So, user error. That's the cause of all my oil leaks here. Is I didn't buy a new housing, so I didn't have brand new bolts to use with the proper amount of sealant on them. And I haven't been putting the proper amount of sealant on when I've put this thing back together. And that's what's causing all the problems. So when I put this all back together, I'm going to use the white sealant because that will hold everything in, and that's definitely proven at this point because I use that on the crank seal bolts, the crank bolts, the flywheel bolts, and that does just fine when you use the proper amount of it. So I will do that. I will put the proper amount of sealant on both of these bolts, torque them in correctly. That's going to solve the oil leaks altogether. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put the engine, the transmission, everything back on, and I'll drive it, and I'll prove that I don't need to change the oil pan gasket. If I do, hey, no big deal. I'll buy another one and change that too, but I believe this is what it is. All right, guys, I've got this all uncovered. This is the scratch that I was talking about that we saw last time. It's sort of the gasket sealing area is, you see the outline of this thing? That's where the sealing area is. And you can see where that scratch goes. It's really only the tip of it that kind of comes into the sealing area. And there's another gasket area on the outside. So that wouldn't have caused an issue even if it was leaking past there, but this is a surface scratch. There's really nothing to this. I can barely even feel it with my finger. So that's just visual. There's a scratch over here. I think I caused this just now, trying to get this thing off, trying to pry the cover off. I forgot to remove the 2 lower bolts, but I'm not worried about that because it's well on the outside of where the gasket seals. You see where the line is? So that's on the outside, not gonna make any difference. So yeah, that's neither of those were issues at all. Now, as far as these bolts and these bolt holes and where they go through, check out, I don't know if there's enough light to see this. Let me see if we can do this. But you see where the rubber of the oil pan gasket is? You see how it's on the inside of where those bolts are? So it seals the oil from leaking out, and those bolts are on the outside of the area that's sealed. So there's no way, there would be no use putting RTV on those bolts. Those bolts are going into blind holes, and there's no way oil is getting in there. It was just the fact that oil was seeping through that hole right there, this guy, and it was seeping through and then getting on the outside of that rubber gasket, and that's why we saw oil dripping down through there. So that's what it was. Cool. So I'm going to button this all back up, get it all back together, and move along. So like I said before, I am using the Dry Bond 1209. It actually comes with this little key that's helpful for dispensing it. So I have put some beads, definitely bead behind the gasket, and then in front of it, and then around the edge, even though that's really not necessary. It's really only necessary in these corners right here, but I put it on anyway, and that's what it looks like. Boom, boom, boom. Cool. And this is the sealant I use, the high temperature thread sealant from Permatex. And I'm running out of it actually, so I might need to get some more. Maybe. Anyway, I'm gonna definitely lather the whole tip of those 2 bolts up so that they're definitely gonna seal this time. So that's how much I've put on. All right guys, that's all done. Everything's all torqued together. The 13mm bolts are torqued to 22 Newton meters and the rest are torqued to 10 Newton meters. Now I'm going to take care of this guy up here. Again, all the oil's been drained already, but there's still probably going to be some in this passage, probably. That was definitely sealed pretty well. But okay, cool. Looks like we're not going to have any bad drips. That's good. See, that's how much I actually needed to put it in order for it to seat. So that's what was wrong, essentially, I think, with that. I think you can never have too much of this sealant, I think. Okay. So that's it. We are now done. Everything's ready to go back together. Except, of course, I don't have that stupid seal for the transmission. So we'll have to wait on that, and I can put everything back together. And the leaks should be finally gone. Okay guys, it's been another couple days. I managed to get a new seal. And something I want to say about this washer is I think I never was putting it in correctly. I thought it was just sort of just like a bent sort of this way on both pieces, but that's not the case. It's only on this one side. The rest of it is flat, and I noticed that there's like a little space where oil comes in right here, and I guess it seems to me that that's where it goes, right in that little indent. Okay, I don't think I was ever putting it in properly. Didn't seem to matter though. Yeah, so drive it in until it's flush all the way around. It should be good. All right, this is the part that I find very stressful. Putting the torque converter in. Now I've got the teeth on the pump gear in there lined up top and bottom. That's the way that it's easiest to do. Let me get the torque converter here. So I've got, see the torque converter is up and down, the teeth are up and down, and then you see where I've screwed the bolts in, bottom and top like that. So what has to happen is, let me explain. You have to get 3 distinct clunks out of it. The first one is going to be this, engaging with the splines inside. Then it's going to be this one. That's the second one. And the third one is those 2 notches. So you'll feel it. And you definitely have to get it in far enough. And if you only get the first 2 clunks in there, you're going to be able to put the transmission on, but you won't get it that last little bit of the way. So you got to do it all the way. And the trick here is not to damage that seal again. So I'm going to be super careful here. So this is where that notch is. There's the one. Now I'm going to turn to try to find that second spline, which sometimes is a little difficult. There, that's the second one. Now we got to get that third one. And here's the one where it's really difficult because the gear on the inside kind of falls down a little bit. And so the little thing is kind of, it's sitting up a little high. So what I want to do is angle it to the side. Hopefully we can see this. I want to angle it sort of downward. I want to angle that nose downward so that it kind of catches in there. If I can, without breaking anything, without damaging that seal this time. And that is essentially the real trick. Such a bastard, man. It's not going for me. This might be one of those turn off the camera situations. Can you stop getting pushed back here, Mr. Transmission? Eventually, right? Okay, let me stick this somewhere. Maybe right there. See, I need to be able to push against it. Here, you guys stay right there. Whew. This took me an hour last time. So I'm just going to keep doing this until I get it. I don't know. What would be the trick to make it easier than this? Possibly, probably, if you're rebuilding one of these transmissions, is to pack that gear full of grease, transmission lube, which is super sticky, and that would sort of hold the gear in the center. It'd be a lot easier to slip this thing in, but there's no way I can do that. So I'm just going to struggle with it, and I'll come back with you when I get it. I do believe I have got it. It's in there. I heard 3 clunks. I believe we're good. So yeah, it's I had to pull it out 3 times. I was real careful every time I pulled it out. And yeah, the second time it turned out I had moved the gear a little bit. So even the friction of it just touching on the wrong point and you turning the torque converter will move the gear a little bit. So I guess don't be afraid to take it out. But when you do, take it out super evenly. Because if you take it out at an angle, that's what damages the seal. At least I believe that's what damages the seal. And that's what I did last time, I guess. So hopefully I did not do that again this time. Anyway, moving on. So I am not going to show the rest of this whole process because it's all pretty straightforward. The same stuff I've covered before in the video a long time ago for, taking out the transmission, putting it back in. So yeah, I'm just going to get the flywheel, the flex plate back on, put the thread sealant back on these bolts. And if you don't have the thread sealant or don't want to do that, you can buy new ones, but thread sealant has always worked just fine. These are not torque to yield. So I'm going to torque everything on properly, put the transmission back on, put everything back on, and then we'll do a drive and see if the thing's still leaking, which I don't think it will be. I think we got it this time. All right, guys, I just got back from a drive, pretty long drive, 45 minutes or so, and we are nice and bone dry. Super hot, actually. Yeah, I do believe we have solved the problem. Finally. So, yay, very cool. All right, well, problem solved. Finally. That was actually a problem that I was unable to solve for like 2 years. And I'm glad to finally have solved it. I feel really stupid that that's what the problem was, just sealant on those 2 bolts into the rear mainsail housing. But I don't know, man. You know, I guess I'm still learning some things after all this time. So hopefully somebody out there will learn from my mistake and not make the same one. Yeah, anyway, if you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. I'm the 50s Kid. Thanks a lot for watching.